Inside a warm, bustling diner, a young black woman stood up to protect a lone Hell's Angel against two police officers. Her actions caused the entire town to turn against her, but what happened next would leave them all in tears. Before we dive in this story, let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Naomi Carter's hands were red and rough as she scrubbed down the worn countertop of Carter's diner for the third time that morning. The breakfast rush, if you could call 4 tired farmers and a pair of truckers a rush, had ended, and the old place had fallen silent again, save for the lazy squeak of the overhead fan struggling against the thick summer air. Naomi glanced at the old cash register, mentally counting the few bills inside, her stomach knotting tighter with every click. It wasn't enough. Not for the overdue electric bill tucked inside her bag, the one stamped in angry red ink, or for the endless medication costs for her father's care. Just a few more months, she whispered under her breath, pushing a tight curl behind her ear, repeating the same hollow promise she had clung to since the day she packed her life into a box and left Atlanta for the slow decay of Willow Creek. Outside, the main street lay deserted, the kind of stillness that spoke of jobs lost and hope packed away. Naomi could feel the weight of every closed shop window like a stone on her chest. First the factory shut down, then the hardware store. Now Carter's diner, her family's legacy, was bleeding out, little by little, while she fought to keep it breathing. The bell over the door jingled, that familiar sound her father had loved once, before the stroke took his voice and half his body. Naomi turned, cloth still in hand, and the sight froze her mid-step. A man filled the doorway, tall and broad, his frame wrapped in dusty black leather that had seen better days. His beard was thick, gray, unruly, and the tattoo snaking up his arms told stories Naomi couldn't even begin to guess at. But it was the patch on his jacket that pulled the room taut. The grim, skeletal reaper clutching a scythe, the unmistakable symbol of the Hell's Angel. The few customers left stiffened. Mrs. Worthington, sitting near the window with her crossword puzzle, clutched her pearls in a little gasp. Joe Larkin, a farmer Naomi had known since childhood, shifted uneasily, lowering his coffee mug with a sharp clink. Even the radio crackled with static for a breathless second, as if the diner itself held its breath. The biker moved toward the counter, boots thudding against the linoleum floor, the sound slow and heavy like war drums. He picked the stool furthest from everyone else, his wide shoulders hunching slightly, as if trying to make himself smaller, invisible. Naomi's father's words came back to her in a whisper. Everyone's money spins the same at Carter's. Still, her heart hammered against her ribs as she wiped her palms on her apron, grabbed a cloudy plastic menu, and filled a glass of water. "Welcome to Carter's," she said, forcing her voice into the same easy rhythm she offered every customer, even as the tension prickled against her skin. "Today's special is chicken fried steak with mashed potatoes. Made it fresh this morning." The biker looked up at her then, and Naomi's breath caught. His eyes, pale blue, rimmed red like he hadn't slept in days, seemed at odds with the hard lines of his face. They weren't the eyes of a man looking for a fight, they were the eyes of a man losing one. "Coffee," he said, his voice low, rough like gravel, but there was a softness there too. "Black. Whatever's fastest from the kitchen. Been on the road since before sunup." As she poured coffee from the battered pot, Naomi noticed his hands, large, calloused, rough, but trembling slightly as he reached for the mug. A hospital bracelet peeked out from beneath his cuff. Her chest tightened. She had seen that look before, too many times in the cancer ward rotations. Someone holding on by a thread. "Long ride ahead of you still?" she asked casually, setting the cup down in front of him. He nodded slowly. "Heading back to Willow Creek Medical," he said, voice thick with exhaustion. "My daughter—" The words cracked, breaking apart like ice under strain. He dropped his gaze to the swirling black of his coffee. Naomi swallowed past the lump rising in her throat. She didn't ask for more. She just smiled gently and said, "Toast and eggs coming right up. 6 minutes tops." As she turned to call the order into the kitchen, Naomi caught the stares from across the room. Suspicious, disapproving, fearful. She knew exactly what this was going to cost her, but she also knew what was right. And Naomi Carter had never been the type to back down from doing right. The bell above the door jingled again, sharper this time, slicing through the low hum of conversation like a blade. Naomi didn't have to turn to know who had just walked in. She felt it in the sudden stiffening of the air, in the way Mrs. Worthington hunched lower over her coffee, in the sharp scrape of Joe Larkin's chair as he shifted uncomfortably. Officer Dean Harper and Deputy Laura Miles had entered Carter's diner, both in full uniform, badges catching the sunlight pouring through the dusty windows. Dean swaggered toward the counter with the easy arrogance of a man who knew the town bent when he leaned, his boots tapping an uneven rhythm against the tile floor. His eyes locked immediately onto the biker hunched over his coffee, and Naomi saw the slow, ugly smile that crept across his face. Well, Dean said, voice loud enough to carry across the room. Don't see your kind in Willow Creek too often. The biker didn't look up. He sipped his coffee, steadying his hands. Naomi tightened her grip on the edge of the counter, feeling a flush rise to her cheeks. Just grabbing some breakfast, officer, the man said quietly, his voice rough but respectful. Laura stood a step behind Dean, her posture stiff, her eyes darting uncomfortably between Naomi and the biker. Dean leaned an elbow on the counter, a deliberate invasion of space. Maybe we should check his ID, Naomi, make sure he's not one of the reapers we got bulletins about. Naomi's heart pounded. The man had done nothing, but Dean was already circling like a vulture. The biker's hand moved slowly, carefully, reaching into his jacket pocket, but Dean's hand dropped instinctively to the holster on his hip. Naomi stepped forward, her voice sharper than she intended. He's a paying customer, Dean, same as anyone else who walks through that door. Dean turned his head, his smirk widening. Same? That's rich. He gestured at the patch on the biker's jacket, the grim reaper with its wicked sight. You know what that means, Naomi? Drugs? Guns? Trouble. The biker finally looked up, his pale eyes locking onto Dean's, calm but unyielding. You don't know anything about me, he said, voice low. Dean barked a humorless laugh. I know enough, and I know better than to trust a man wearing that death patch. Naomi's hands were trembling now, but she stood her ground. She could feel every eye in the diner on her, some silently pleading with her not to make a scene, others waiting to see which way she would break. She thought of her father's words again, the lesson he'd drilled into her from childhood. Judge by actions, not appearances. Always. You don't have the right to harass someone just because you don't like how they look, Naomi said, her voice steady despite the knot of fear tightening in her chest. Dean straightened, his expression hardening. You're making a mistake, Naomi, he said, his voice low and warning. This town doesn't take kindly to people siding with trouble. The biker pushed his plate away, reaching for his wallet, but Naomi placed a hand on the counter between them. Your money's no good here today, she said firmly. Breakfast is on me. The biker blinked in surprise, a flash of something unreadable crossing his face, something dangerously close to gratitude. Dean snorted in disgust, tossing a few crumpled bills onto the counter. Let's go, Laura, he barked, turning on his heel. Laura hesitated a beat longer, her gaze lingering on Naomi with something almost like apology, before following Dean out the door. The bell gave a sour jangle as it swung shut behind them. The diner fell into an uneasy silence. Naomi busied herself cleaning the counter, ignoring the whispered conversations that sprang up like weeds behind her. The biker finished his coffee in a few quick gulps, leaving a $20 bill tucked under his cup despite Naomi's protests. He stood, adjusting his jacket. Name's Hank Morrison, he said simply. Naomi gave him a small, genuine smile. Naomi Carter. Safe travels, Mr. Morrison. Hank nodded once, a deep, solemn gesture, then turned and walked out into the blazing afternoon sun. Naomi watched him go, a tight ache blooming in her chest. She had no illusions about how this would play out. Small towns had long memories for things they didn't like and short tempers for those who crossed unspoken lines. And she had just drawn a big, bold line in the sand. The afternoon wore on. slower than molasses, the few customers who trickled in offering tight smiles or none at all. When Naomi finally flipped the open sign to close that evening, she sat heavily in one of the booths and dropped her face into her hands. She hadn't wanted a fight. She didn't need another enemy. But when she closed her eyes, all she could see was the way Hank's hand trembled around that coffee mug, the glint of the hospital bracelet flashing like a silent cry for help. She remembered the countless times in the hospital back in Atlanta when strangers had shown her small kindnesses at her lowest moments, and she knew she couldn't have done anything differently, even if it cost her everything. As Naomi locked up for the night, she noticed something taped to the glass door, a crude piece of cardboard with angry red letters scrawled across it, "No biker lovers, no trouble mockers." Her stomach dropped. She ripped it down, crumpling it in her fist, but the message burned itself into her memory all the same. Trouble had found its way to Carter's diner, and Naomi knew this was only the beginning. But deep down, even through the fear and the doubt, she felt a stubborn ember of something stronger begin to glow. She hadn't backed down today, and she wouldn't back down tomorrow either. That night, long after the last light in the diner flickered out, Naomi made her way through the quiet halls of Willow Creek Medical. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, casting a pale wash over the linoleum floors, and the scent of antiseptic clung to the air like memory. She paused at room 214, her fingers brushing the edge of the door frame before gently pushing it open. The room was dim, save for the soft glow of the monitor beside the bed and the steady beep that marked each breath her father still managed to draw. Evelyn Carter lay motionless, eyes closed, her once powerful frame now fragile beneath the hospital blanket. Naomi moved to the bedside, pulled a chair close, and sat slowly, reaching for her father's hand. It felt warm but distant, like holding on to something already half faded. "Hey, Dad," she whispered, voice cracking as it caught in her throat. "It's me." Her thumb gently stroked the back of her father's hand, a gesture she remembered Evelyn doing for her when she was sick as a child. "Rough day at the diner. I might have picked a fight with the sheriff," she added with a small, tired laugh. "Not on purpose, I swear. But you raised me to speak up when something's wrong, and today there was this man. Big guy, biker, looked like trouble to everyone else." Naomi paused, swallowing hard. "But he wasn't. He was just a dad. His daughter's in bad shape at this very hospital, stage 4 cancer. And the way those cops treated him, Dad, like he wasn't even human." The monitors clicked softly, indifferent to her words, but Naomi pressed on, her voice steadier now. "I don't know if I did the right thing. Business is already bad, and now folks are whispering, calling me things. Someone even left a sign on the door like I betrayed this town just by showing kindness." Her eyes burned, and she blinked quickly, refusing to let the tears fall. "But I remembered what you always said. You treat people by how they act, not how they dress. And that man, he didn't need judgment today, he needed grace." She leaned forward, lowering her voice as if sharing a sacred truth. "I think I scared a few people, Dad. Maybe even myself. But I didn't back down, and I think you'd be proud of that." She sat in silence for a long while, listening to the steady rhythm of her father's breathing and the soft hum of machines. Then, as if on instinct, she leaned down and kissed the back of Evelyn's hand. "Sleep well, Dad. I've got the diner, and I've got your backbone, too." With that, Naomi rose, gave one last glance at her father's peaceful face, and walked out into the night, carrying the weight of that day and the quiet strength of the woman who had taught her how to carry it. The next morning, Naomi arrived at the diner before the sun had even cleared the tree line behind Willow Creek. She unlocked the front door, heart heavy, stomach tight, eyes still gritty from a night of restless sleep. The cardboard sign was gone. She had burned it in a trash barrel behind the building, watching it curl and blacken like the shame someone had hoped to pin on her. But the silence in town was louder than any insult. The usual breakfast crowd didn't show. Not Mrs. Worthington, not the truckers, not the 2 old men who played chess in the back booth every Thursday. By 9 a.m. the coffee had gone cold and untouched. By 10, Naomi had begun wiping already clean counters, just for something to do. At noon she stood alone behind the register, staring at the near-empty tip jar and wondering how long she could keep this up before the lights flickered out for good. Then the bell rang. Naomi looked up, expecting maybe a lost traveler or a delivery mix-up. But instead, two strangers stepped inside. The man was in his 50s, tall, lean, weathered in the way men get from years on the road. His jeans were faded, and his jacket bore the small silver skull pin of the Grim Reapers, understated but unmistakable. Beside him stood a woman, same age, long gray hair pulled into a braid that hung over her shoulder. She wore a denim vest patched with the same insignia, but her eyes were soft, her smile gentle. "Naomi Carter?" the man asked. Naomi nodded, unsure, tension creeping back into her spine. "I'm Roy Morrison. This is my wife, Linda, Hank's brother." Naomi's shoulders eased just slightly, and she stepped out from behind the counter. They shook hands, firm, warm, respectful. "Hank told us what happened," Linda said. "He wanted to come himself, but he's still at the hospital, with Jessie." Naomi's expression softened. "How is she?" Roy's face clouded, just for a second. "Stage 4, they're trying something experimental. It's the last shot." Naomi swallowed hard, her chest tightening. "I'm so sorry," she said quietly. "He said you were kind to him," Linda continued, "when no one else would be. Said you stood up to the police for him, that you didn't look at the patch, you looked at the man." Naomi gave a small shrug. "Didn't seem like he needed a fight. Seemed like he needed a meal." Roy smiled faintly. "Sometimes those are the same thing." Naomi offered them coffee, and they accepted. She poured it slowly, trying not to let her hands shake. Something about their presence felt significant, like the hush before a summer storm. And when they finished their cups, Roy set his down and said, "We wanted to do something, to say thank you, not with money, don't worry, with support." Naomi tilted her head, puzzled. "Support?" Roy just smiled. "Give it a few minutes." And then it happened. At first it was just a sound, a low rumble, distant, like thunder. Then more, louder, closer. Naomi stepped to the window and felt her breath hitch. Down both ends of Main Street, the horizon shimmered with chrome, motorcycles, dozens, no hundreds. One by one they roared into view, engines snarling and growling as they filled the street in front of Carter's diner. They came in waves, men and women, young and old, every one of them bearing patches, jackets, helmets, and vests stitched with the insignias of different Grim Reapers chapters from across the state. Some bore flags, others held small bouquets. All of them came for the same reason. The noise grew deafening, then slowly subsided as engines were cut, riders dismounted, stretching, talking softly, moving in unison like a migrating herd. Naomi stood frozen, watching as the parking lot overflowed and the sidewalk disappeared beneath booted feet. She looked to Roy, stunned. "What is this?" she whispered. Linda smiled. "Hank told his chapter about you. They told others. Word travels fast in our world. You treated one of us like a person. That means something." Naomi's voice caught. "But that's over 200 people. Why?" Roy's eyes held steady. "Because when the world turns its back on us, we remember the ones who didn't." The bell above the door jingled, and the first riders stepped inside, respectful, quiet, nodding to Naomi like she was someone important. They took seats, filled booths, leaned against walls where no chairs remained. Naomi stammered, I don't have enough food for all these people." Roy grinned. "Taken care of. Linda called ahead to your suppliers last night. Trucks are on their way, costs covered." Hunting Naomi felt dizzy. "By who?" "By us," Linda said simply. "Consider it an investment in kindness." Outside, townspeople began to gather. They stared from across the street, whispered on porches, peered out of windows. But they didn't hide. They watched, they wondered, and slowly some of them crossed the street, cautiously, curious. Naomi's old classmate, Moloch, stepped inside, glancing around at the sea of leather jackets before raising a hand in greeting. "You still serving those biscuits?" he asked with a crooked grin. Naomi blinked, then laughed, wiping her hands on her apron. "Sure am. "You'll have to share a table, though." "Not a problem," he said, taking a seat beside a woman with a pink mohawk and a patch that read, "Reapers Never Quit." More locals followed. Conversations started, cautious at first, then easier. Naomi watched, wonder spreading in her chest like sunlight through storm clouds. Her diner, her father's diner, was full. Not just with people, but with possibility, with change. And then the bell jingled one more time. Naomi turned, her heart catching in her throat. Hank Morrison stood in the doorway. He looked exhausted, eyes rimmed red, jacket dusty from the road. But there was a smile tugging at the edge of his mouth. "Hope you don't mind," he said, voice quiet. "I brought a few friends." Naomi walked over, met him halfway. "Not at all," she said, voice thick with emotion. "Come in, I saved you a seat." The afternoon sun dipped lower, casting long golden shadows across Willow Creek as Carter's diner buzzed with life like it hadn't in years. Naomi moved like a whirlwind behind the counter, refilling coffee, shouting quick orders to the kitchen, sliding plates of burgers and fries across the counter to waiting hands. The delivery trucks had come just like Roy promised, crates of fresh eggs, bread, meat, and coffee beans stacked high at the back door. A few of the bikers had unloaded everything without being asked, laughing and joking like it was just another part of the gathering. Naomi had called in a few friends to help, some from the church youth group, a few neighbors she wasn't even sure liked her that much. But nobody hesitated. There was something about the energy in the diner now, an unspoken understanding that something special was happening, something worth being part of. Every table was filled. Riders with leather vests, weathered faces, and calloused hands laughed and swapped stories with curious locals. Mrs. Worthington, who had clutched her pearls just the day before, sat at a booth deep in conversation with a woman whose biceps could probably break steel pipes, but who was animatedly discussing quilting patterns. Melig taught a group of bikers how to play dominoes in the back corner, slamming the tiles down with dramatic flair that made the whole table roar with laughter. Even Deputy Laura Miles slipped inside quietly, sitting at the counter and accepting a mug of coffee from Naomi with a nod that said more than words could. Naomi caught her breath for a second, leaning against the pass-through window, just soaking it all in. This was what her father had dreamed about when he opened Carter's Diner. A place where nobody cared about the color of your skin, the patch on your jacket, or the job you did or didn't have. Just good food, good company, and a roof to share it under. The bell above the door jingled again, and the conversations died down as a man stepped inside. He was massive, broad-shouldered, his beard white and thick, a leather vest stretched across his chest marked with bold patches, and the heavy words President, Grim Reaper's MC, Riverside Chapter. Naomi wiped her hands on her apron and stepped forward instinctively, heart thudding. The man smiled warmly and extended a hand. "He must be Naomi," he said, voice like gravel and sunshine. "Name's Marcus Turner." Naomi shook his hand firmly. "Welcome to Carter's, Marcus," he chuckled. "You've made quite an impression on the family." Marcus turned to the room, raising his hand, and just like that, the chatter died down to a respectful hush. Every eye in the diner turned to him. Marcus cleared his throat, his voice carrying easily through the packed room. "I wanted to take a minute to thank Miss Naomi Carter here," he began, gesturing to her with a proud tilt of his head, "because when others turned their backs, she didn't. When others judged a man for a patch on his back, she saw the father." The heads nodded throughout the room, murmurs of agreement rippling like a wave. "Now, in our world," Marcus continued, "loyalty and respect mean something. They're everything. So I want it known, Carter's Diner, from this day forward, rides under the protection of the Hell's Angel." A cheer went up, loud enough to rattle the windows, boots pounding against the floor, fists pounding the tables in celebration. Naomi stood frozen, stunned, tears stinging her eyes as the room erupted in applause. She caught Hank's gaze across the room. He smiled at her, small but full of pride, and Naomi smiled back. A trembling, disbelieving thing. Marcus wasn't finished. He waited for the noise to die down, then said, "And if anyone in this town has a problem with that, they'll have a problem with all of us." His tone was firm, but not threatening, just a simple statement of fact. He turned, looked directly at Deputy Laura Miles, who sat stiffly at the counter, coffee halfway to her lips. Laura swallowed hard, but nodded once, slowly, her eyes dropping to the mug in her hands. Satisfied, Marcus smiled and turned back to Naomi. "Now," he said, grinning wide enough to flash a gold tooth, "who's ready for pie? I heard there's no better slice in 3 counties." Another roar of laughter, and just like that, the tension broke into easy joy again. Naomi laughed too, wiping her eyes quickly with the hem of her apron before hustling back to the kitchen to cut as many slices of pie as her hands could manage. As the evening wore on, the gathering spilled into the streets. Someone rigged up a portable speaker to a motorcycle battery, and classic rock poured into the warm summer air. Kids from the neighborhood rode tiny bicycles up and down the sidewalks, weaving between big chrome bikes like fish darting through a coral reef. Old-timers leaned against lampposts, trading stories with men and women whose leather jackets told tales of different towns, different lives, but somehow the same beating heart. Naomi's father, who hadn't left the house in months, even ventured out, bundled in a shawl, pushed in a wheelchair by one of the young riders who had an easy smile and steady hands. It wasn't just a good day. It was the kind of day that stitched itself into the fabric of a town's memory forever. And in the center of it all, standing tall in her worn sneakers and coffee-stained apron, was Naomi Carter. Still tired, still a little scared of what tomorrow might bring, but for the first time in a long time, filled with a fierce, burning hope. She caught Hank standing outside the diner, talking quietly with Roy and Linda, a smile on his tired face as he watched Jesse's hospital bracelet dangling from his wrist like a fragile promise. Naomi crossed over to him. "Hey," she said softly. Hank turned, his face lighting up. "Jesse," he said, voice thick, "got some good news. Today, early signs, but the new treatment's working." Naomi's breath caught in her throat, a giddy kind of relief flooding her chest. "That's amazing," she said, and without thinking she wrapped Hank in a fierce hug. He stiffened for half a second, before hugging her back, strong and sure. When they pulled apart, Hank said, voice gruff with emotion, "She wants to meet you. Said you sound like the kind of woman she hopes to be." Naomi blinked hard against fresh tears. "I'd like that," she said. "I'd like that a lot." The sun dipped below the rooftops of Willow Creek, leaving the sky a soft wash of purples and golds as the last few bikes rumbled off into the night, leaving only the faint smell of engine oil and laughter lingering in the warm air. Naomi stood on the front steps of Carter's diner, arms crossed loosely, apron still tied crooked around her waist, watching the taillights disappear one by one down the dusty road. The diner behind her still buzzed with the faint clatter of dishes being washed and chairs being stacked, but out here, in the hush of early evening, it felt like standing in the middle of a miracle. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing it in, the scent of fresh pie, worn leather, and summer dust mingling into something that smelled like hope. A soft throat clear behind her made her turn. Roy and Linda stood side by side, hands clasped together, wide grins lighting up their tired faces. Between them, Roy held a brown paper package, thick and slightly crumpled at the edges. He stepped forward, holding it out. "From all of us," he said simply. Naomi blinked, reaching out, unwrapping the bundle carefully. Inside, folded with surprising care, was a custom leather vest, black, supple, stitched across the back with a patch that made her breath catch. Carter's Diner, embroidered in bold letters, encircled by the words, "Friend of the Reapers." Below it, a smaller patch, "Protected." Naomi ran her fingers over the stitching, throat tightening, words failing her for a long moment. Roy clapped a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You stood up when it mattered. Most people don't." Linda smiled, eyes bright with unshed tears. "We don't forget kindness, not ever." Tucked inside the vest was a simple note, scrawled in uneven handwriting Naomi instantly recognized as Hank's. "Thank you for seeing the man, not the jacket. Jessie smiling again. She can't wait to meet you. Hank." Naomi pressed the note to her chest for a moment, grounding herself against the overwhelming tide of emotions surging through her. Inside the diner, she found a spot of honor for the vest, hanging it right next to her father's old stained apron and faded photograph, the two symbols side by side, past and future, struggle and hope, stitched together under one roof. As she adjusted the hanger, the bell above the door jingled. Naomi turned to find Officer Dean Harper standing awkwardly just inside, hat in hand, uniform looking strangely too stiff and formal in the relaxed, easy warmth the bikers had left behind. He shuffled forward, cleared his throat. "Coffee?" Naomi asked lightly, not giving an inch. Dean nodded. "Please." She poured him a cup without ceremony, sliding it across the counter. Dean wrapped his hands around the mug, looking like he wanted to say 100 things, but not knowing how to start. Finally, he settled on a stiff nod. "Good turnout today," he said gruffly. Naomi smiled just a little, letting the silence speak for itself. Dean looked down at his coffee, studying the swirling black surface. "Town's changing," he muttered. Naomi didn't argue. She just tucked a clean towel over her shoulder and went back to wiping down the counter, leaving Dean to sit there, shoulders hunched, sipping his coffee in the slowly fading light. The days that followed moved with a rhythm Naomi hadn't felt in years. Carter's diner stayed busy. Locals, travelers, even a few bikers passing through, always polite, always paying cash, always leaving tips so generous Naomi had to buy a second cash box just to hold it all. Word spread about the little diner with the big heart, and slowly Willow Creek's icy walls began to thaw. Mrs. Worthington became a regular again, bringing fresh pie recipes to trade. Joe Larkin brought his grandkids to marvel at the motorcycles lined up on weekends. Deputy Laura Miles started dropping by in plain clothes, leaving her badge and tension at home. And through it all, Naomi remained the steady heartbeat at the center. She served coffee, she flipped pancakes, she laughed and listened and lived. And every so often, she would glance at the leather vest hanging on the wall, feel the solid weight of it in her chest, and remember that sometimes the smallest moments, a hot cup of coffee, a kind word, a refusal to look away, could change everything. Because at Carter's Diner, it wasn't about the patches on your back, the color of your skin, or the mistakes you carried like old scars. It was about what you did when someone needed you. It was about showing up, standing up, and offering a seat at the table. No judgment, no fear, just a plate of good food, a warm smile, and a place to be seen. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to change a town. Maybe even enough to change the world. One cup of coffee at a time. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.